O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down in the driver's seat and when I rise up through the gears. You discern my thoughts from a car. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. However the world finds you, I hope you're well. This is another slightly off the cuff episode of Thoughts from a Car, the ramblings of an idiot. And today it's 4 days, as we record, 4 days before Christmas Day. I thought I would do something about Christmas. Why not, you say? Exactly. When I was a minister, I used to go to endless nativity plays in schools or in churches or places like that. And they were fine, they were all right. It was nice to see the wee kids all dressed up, all being very cute, all fluffing their lines and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, very nice, very nice, very nice. Very boring, but very nice. And it occurred to me that the nativity plays that are put on in schools and churches and things like that are a bit of a mix. Not a mix in terms of quality or production values or anything like that, but a mix in the sense that they're a mix of the nativity story in Matthew and the nativity story in Luke. They take elements from Matthew's story, they take elements from Luke's story, and they bung them together in one super story. And that is presented as history. That is the story of the birth of Jesus, end of. And unfortunately, it's not really that. And you say, well, you're not liberal, you just think, and no, it's not anything to do with theological outlook. You can discover this by just reading the things yourself. Now, you will need a little bit of theological background and knowledge, but not an awful lot. And the little bit of theological background or knowledge that you need is to do with the chronology of the Gospels. When we open up a New Testament, we think Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts of the Apostles, letters of Paul, any other letters, Revelation, the end. That's the order that things happened in. That's the order that they were written in. But that's not the case at all. Paul wrote anything. His letters were the first things written in the New Testament before anything else was written. And in Paul's letters, he mentions very, very little about the biography of Jesus. Very little. He throws in the odd little thing. He says Jesus born of a woman under the law and things like that. But he doesn't talk about miraculous birth stories or shepherds or angels or anything like that. And then you have the Gospels that we have, and there were a lot of Gospels written. We only have 4 that are canonical or considered authoritative. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But the order the order they were written in was Mark's Gospel was first, written, I don't know, 60, 65, 70 AD. Matthew and Luke were written roughly the same time, maybe 75, 85 AD, and then John's Gospel is the very latest one, and it was written somewhere between 90 and 110 AD. So Mark is the original Gospel, and we know this, our scholars know this, and even conservative scholars say this, though they will quibble about the dates, but they acknowledge that Mark is the original Gospel. And why do we know it's the original Gospel? Because Matthew and Luke copy from Mark almost verbatim. Well, not quite verbatim, but they take the stories and the sayings and the structures and the thing, and they maybe reorder them a bit and do that, but they basically take most of Mark and then add bits onto it. So Matthew takes about 85-90% of Mark and adds his own 10-15% later on, that being the Sermon on the Mount. Luke takes maybe 70%, 80%, maybe, and adds his 20 to 30%. The prodigal son, what's the other one? The lost sheep, all that sort of stuff as well. He adds that in, but they take the essence of Mark and they copy it almost exactly, though Matthew corrects a lot of the Greek mistakes, grammar mistakes, but they copy it exactly. And that could only happen if Mark was first. If Mark was writing after Matthew and Luke, it would seem strange that he would copy most of what they said, leave out the Sermon on the Mount, leave out the prodigal son, and then write it very bad, use their correct Greek grammar and then write very bad grammar about it. So the order that these things were written was Mark's first, Matthew and Luke copy Mark to a massive extent, and then John does his own thing at the end. But the only time we ever hear about the birth of Jesus is in Matthew and Luke. Now you can say, well, John knew that this was already covered in Matthew and Luke, so he never bothered writing about it. That's not quite correct, but it doesn't really apply to Mark. Imagine you writing a history, and remember, if you think of it as a history, imagine writing a history of Jesus but leaving out the birth stuff. It's strange, isn't it? Imagine me writing a biography of Paul McCartney and me starting from the release of the album Ram in 1972. You'd say, but what about, you've left the whole Beatles stuff out, you've left about him growing up in Liverpool and Sgt. Pepper and Shea Stadium, and imagine starting my biography of McCartney a good 13 years plus after some of the most important events of his life. It just doesn't make sense. And it's when you know the chronology of the Gospels, you know that it's Mark, Matthew, Luke, and then John, and then you read in those Gospels when Jesus is confirmed as the Christ or the Messiah, then you begin to see how it comes into play. Because in Mark's Gospel, the earliest Gospel, Jesus is confirmed as the Messiah at his baptism. A voice, I think it's just in that he hears, says, "You are my son in whom I am well pleased." So he is the Son of God at his baptism. In Matthew and Luke, he becomes the Messiah, the Son of God, at his birth. Wise men come to confirm it. Only in Matthew, not in Luke. Luke doesn't have any wise men at all. Matthew doesn't have any angels, any shepherds, anything like that. They're two slightly different stories. But Jesus is confirmed as the Christ or the Messiah at his birth. And then John, the latest of the Gospels, confirms Jesus as the Son of God, or the Logos, the eternal Logos, before the foundation of the world. So you see it moving backwards as each Gospel is written. Baptism to birth to before the foundation of the world. That's theology, that's not history. So the Nativity is a theological treatise. It's not a history. And even when you look at the two nativity stories, you have Matthew, where the birth is in Bethlehem. They don't travel anywhere. It's all Joseph in dreams. It's the wise men, isn't it? What else happens in Matthew? But they certainly don't travel anywhere. Jesus is born in his own home, and then when he's round about 2 years old, they flee to Egypt to escape Herod. In Luke's Gospel, they travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem because of some Roman tax census. I don't think there is any history on why would you travel to your birth town for a tax census. you not just stay where you are working, so that they know how much money you're bringing in for taxes. And then it's all about Mary in Luke's Gospel, and it's in angelic visits, not dreams, and it's shepherds and what's the one? Angel choirs of angels singing songs. Matthew doesn't mention any of that, which is sort of odd to leave out, isn't it? In Luke's Gospel, they're down, they find no room at the inn, all that sort of stuff. They have to go into a manger or wherever it is, and then 7 days after Jesus' birth, he goes for the circumcision and cleansing at the temple, and then they go home to Nazareth. They don't stay until he's 2 and then flee to Egypt under persecution from Herod. He returns to Nazareth and he grows up there. So it's not a history, it's a theology. But it's an important theology because it's done in the light of the Roman Empire in which it's written. The Roman Empire, some of the titles for Caesar were things like Prince of Peace was one of them. Son of God. Caesars were believed to be divine or partly divine. Caesar was all powerful. He was the head of the Roman Empire. And so this person, Jesus, comes along and he's different and he's meaningful and he has a connection with God. And so it's a way of saying this person represents the real power of God, the real character of God, the real however you want to put it. And so they dress it up like Caesar. So Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's the Son of God. And he's not born into wealth or power or influence. He's born in a stable, or if you're in Matthew's Gospel, a simple house, simple structure. He's born into poverty. He's born with no privilege. He's born with no power. And yet, there is where the meaning of life or the meaning of God or the character of God resides. So it's not a history. And it's lovely when the kids do the nativity thing. I don't take that away from anybody, but it's not history. If it was history, all the Gospels would mention it, and Paul would mention it when he was writing. But it's not, it's theology. But it's a special sort of theology to illustrate how they understood who Jesus was. And you see that develop as it goes back in time. But anyway, look, well, enjoy your Christmas. I'll probably not see you until after Christmas. Enjoy your Christmas. I hope you get time off from work if you're working. I hope you get time to spend with family or friends. I hope that it's a chance for you to relax, to enjoy a bit of a break. And sure, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye bye now.